Hello and welcome to Direct and Current, the official podcast of Electrical Business Magazine. In the world of electrical contracting, the path to a job well done is paved on successfully navigating risks. Even the smallest oversight can quickly snowball into costly rework, schedule delays, safety issues, or even legal disputes. As AI continues to drive conversations about what the future of workplace success looks like, the race is on to realize the potential of these tools in helping contractors identify possible problems before they become expensive realities. In episode 2 of our Site Current miniseries, we're joined once again by Patabid's Melvin Newman to continue our journey looking at how emerging technology and software are transforming the electrical contracting world. This time, we're exploring what AI can offer electrical contractors in terms of strengthening risk management across their business, from spotting gaps in project documentation and contracts, to helping contractors unlock the potential of the organizational data that they generate every day. Join us as we look at the present and future of AI as the newest solution in the electrical contractor's risk mitigation toolbox. This podcast is brought to you by Patabid. Patabid Quantify is a modern, AI-powered electrical estimating software built to help contractors win more work. With full graphical takeoff, estimators can complete bids faster and with greater accuracy. Quantify connects directly with leading electrical suppliers like JessCan and City Electric Supply for live material pricing, so your numbers are always current when it counts. From first takeoff to final closeout, this proudly Canadian-built platform gives electrical contractors the tools to bid smarter and operate more competitively. I'm Jack Burton, and today we're diving into part 2 of our Site Current miniseries, which explores how emerging software and technology is changing the workplaces and workflows of electrical contractors from across the country. Joining us again today is Melvin Newman, CEO of Patabid, to help us tackle the topic of risk mitigation, specifically how emerging AI tools fit into the practices and processes of risk mitigation for electrical contractors, along with the ways that contractors can use AI to take their risk mitigation to the next level. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Melvin. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me on here. And you know what? We're heading into summer. It is a hailstorm outside right now, and the power's still on, so pretty good.
That's like, I can't even imagine having hail here in Ontario. You have my sympathies.
we certainly like it here. I'm south of Calgary, so it's nowhere near as bad as the north end of Calgary. It's they get some pretty wild weather just that short hop away.
Like it's been a cool summer, but what that means here is that I'll wear long sleeves instead of short sleeves, essentially, every now and then. I don't have to worry about golf balls hitting my rooftop.
We were down to 5 degrees yesterday, so it was a little chilly.
Oy. Well, let's talk about something maybe a little more sunnier, a little more.
Yeah, there we go. Yep.
Let's talk about risk management.
I don't know if that's more sunny or not for most people, but it is absolutely crucial to.
Well, you know what is sunnier is navigating risk management in a positive and productive way.
There we go.
And I think it's an understatement to say that risk management in electrical contracting is kind of a big deal. It touches everything from worker safety to cash flow to warranty liability. It's a big topic. And so I'd like to just start off by getting a sense of where AI might fit into all of it. So Melvin, when you zoom out and take a look at that whole picture, where would you say that AI currently has the most meaningful foothold in helping contractors manage those risks? And also, where would you say it's mostly still hype?
That is an excellent question. I would say that with the current state of AI technology out right now, when it comes to risk mitigation, risk exposure, and understanding, this is probably the singular strongest point in modern day AI. Risk is at its core is a statistical thing. It's a pattern. It's, there's a number of things that feed into it. but it's all based on statistics. You know, what are the chances of something bad happening here financially or safety or any of those sort of things. And LLMs are especially well tuned to identifying those sort of patterns and those sort of things in day to day data streams. Everything that we do on a construction site, right from the estimate to the closeout, is generating data. Now, what happens is the subtrades are kind of at the highest level of risk here
Hmm.
because the GCs can afford to and do employ large teams of people to effectively brute force this problem. They have, you know, a number of lawyers on staff, and if the project exceeds certain thresholds, usually around the $5 to $10 million, before an estimator is even allowed to bid the job, the lawyer has to review all the tender documents, specifically the front ends. They don't care about the drawings and such. But then you get into the drawings and such, and now they have teams that are specifically there to evaluate the risk of things like heavy lifts and that sort of
Hmm.
thing on the project. The subtrades don't have access to that. It is hugely expensive to employ those sort of teams. So unless you're a massive organization on the order of, you know, a Black and McDonald or a modern Niagara, you simply can't afford that. But this is
Hmm.
where AIs are very well tuned at identifying and exposing those sort of patterns. Things like prejudicial contract terms. AIs are extremely adept and very accurate today at exposing that language because it is highly statistical in nature. Where that language shows up in a contract document and the phraseology that is used is highly consistent because our legal system is extremely well structured. And so while they might try to hide certain things in there, the patterns are always the same. And so this is really where modern AI and LLMs probably I would say is the second strongest point outside of actually writing code
Hmm.
that they can really step in and facilitate an understanding that you can take away from your project documents.
And then also kind of going back to where is it mostly still hype? Are there any kind of places that people should be mindful of that they're not getting that complete picture when using it as a risk mitigation tool?
I mean, there's the hype is always around data sovereignty these days.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of the what I would argue is the largest hype factor. If you are using the free versions of AI to do this, don't.
Hmm.
That's very very bad. Anything that is free means that you yourself are the product, and they take full ownership of everything that you upload to them. So when it comes to dealing with these sort of tools these days, understanding what they are doing with your data and where it's going is absolutely critical. If you are going to be signing up for some sort of proprietary legal review agent or
Hmm.
something along those lines, you need to do a bit of a deep question of their salespeople and then their technical people about what are they actually doing under the hood.
Hmm.
Are they just because 99% of the time these agents are actually just front ends to one of the three major AIs out there, Claude, ChatGPT, or if they're really cheap, Grok or Meta or one of those.
Hmm.
Um, and they will function very, very well for you, but you have lost total control of where your data is going and what's happening to it. That may or may not be a major concern. So
Totally.
the hype right now is more around what's actually happening to your data. So just
Hmm.
because somebody, you know, in your town comes to you and says, "Hey, I built this AI agent. You should use it because I'm, you know, Canadian." That doesn't actually mean that your data is
Yeah.
staying where you think it is.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned this because I am really curious to get into, how AI can be used for all of this data that, these organizations are generating every single day on every single project they're working on. But let's put a pin in that. I actually wanted to return to something that we kind of talked about in our last episode. Check out part one of our site current mini series on ebmag.com. That's ebmag.com if you haven't already. But one of the most consequential risks for electrical contractors, especially when it comes to estimating, are those scope gaps. Things that
Mhm.
kind of you were talking about earlier are clearly in the field, but can also live in that gray zone between drawing specs and trade jurisdictions. So, how do you see AI tools helping estimators and contractors identify those gaps during the bid phase? And what processes should a contractor have in place to make sure that analysis doesn't create a false sense of completeness?
Yeah, so this goes back to these AIs and LLMs and everything that we're doing these days will not replace the human in the loop.
Hmm.
Um, they are themselves simply statistical models. That's a bit of a gross simple. They're actually the most insane statistical models we as a
Hmm.
species have ever come up with, but they are still quite literally what are called transformers, taking an input and creating an output for it.
Hmm.
And so you always have to validate what it's putting out. So a properly formatted AI, whether it's running as an agent or whether you are talking directly to Claude, or Claude, as some people call it, makes me cringe every time I hear that. Um, Having grown up in and around Ottawa and had some French Canadian coworkers that were very instrumental in my
Hmm.
career, so it's Claude or Claude, not Claude. So whether you're talking directly to these models, or talking to an AI agent that is being backed by one of these models, the core here is to validate its output. So the human needs to look at it and every time question, does
Hmm.
this make sense? And most importantly, the well formatted models will feed back to you exactly verbatim what they found and where. So when you load up a contract document,
Yeah.
you load up the CCDC2 and you think this is awesome. It's a CCDC2 project that's standardized. It's a fair and equitable contract document. But then you open up the spec and the first 100 pages are the subterms that they are appending to the
Hmm.
CCDC contract.
Hmm.
That's what you definitely need something to take a look at, because that means that you can basically take that template they sent over, tear it up, and throw it in the garbage because that's not what you'll be signing. That is the kind of thing that the AI will be able to read through and then bring back to you the exact paragraph and section that it showed up
Oh,
at,
wow.
and then go and just double check.
Hmm.
Always make sure that you are actually reading that correctly, especially for the big terms like liquidated damages and those sort of things.
Hmm.
Now, what's really quite interesting with these is because they are pattern based, they're not looking for explicit terminology. They're not like opening up the PDF and hitting Control F
Yeah.
and looking for liquidated damages, because that term, while it is the most common way of expressing it, prejudicial contracting partners may change it to read something like failure to complete or exceeded costs or any sort of different thing, or schedule overrun costs. They all actually mean exactly the same thing. They're going to try to back charge you.
Hmm.
And where the LLMs are running this, because they are looking at the patterns of this, they're not
Hmm.
actually looking for specific words. They're able to pick out, hey, this pattern of phraseology is bad. It is
Hmm.
typically
Hmm.
followed by something that is not good for the user. So when you say, tell me if there's liquidated damages on here, it can actually go and say, that word doesn't explicitly show up, but here's the similar wording that they're
Interesting.
using to do the same thing to you.
Hmm.
And that means that an estimator, like a senior estimator, can run a level of due diligence on a project now that used to take a team of lawyers several days to
Yeah.
achieve.
Yeah.
And that's the core win here. We, as the sub trades, have now at our disposal something that the GCs, without getting too ugly with it, there are some GCs that have used this significantly to their advantage. They haven't mitigated the risk so much as identified it and moved it onto a subtrade.
Hmm.
Now, the subtrades have this capacity, especially the electrical and mechanical, because to be honest, the electrical have it even worse than the mechanical.
Hmm.
they're usually the last ones holding the bag on a project when schedule
Yeah.
overruns happen. And so now you have a means of identifying that far, far earlier in the process, and you can react now. Or you can even proact if you want to
Mm.
make up a terrible word. You can start to mitigate that long before it becomes
And
an issue on the project.
all that data that we were kind of just talking about earlier. So I think one thing that can be overlooked is the risk that can come from ignoring all of the data that contractors already have at their fingertips just by virtue of operating, from job costing history to incident reports or even supplier performance. So, Melvin, what would you say are some of the ways that contractors can use AI to leverage their own operational data to highlight any risk signals that they might currently be missing?
That effectively is the question right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that question, especially it is a particularly unique one to construction as a whole. I'm in discussions with another group right now. We're actually loosely just started exploring this concept. Like construction generates day to day, outside of the internet as a whole, some of the largest volumes of data
I can imagine.
of any industry. It's similar to the financial industry, banking, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. In the level of data that is continuously being generated, the core problem in construction is that data set is a phenomenal mess.
Mm-hmm.
It is spread across everything from Revit 3D models to proprietary data sources in things like P6 scheduling, into Microsoft project scheduling, into, estimating formats and those sort of things. So being able to structure out of that amorphous blob of data something that is actionable is a very difficult task. Contract documents and those sort of things are much simpler because they are pre-structured. Generally, they have a standardized language, that sort of thing. But when you start to try to draw together like you're working on a P3 project, for
Mm-hmm.
example, a massive new public-private partnership hospital job. We're talking something that $1.5 billion, mega project, and it's P3, which means that at the start of the project, at the very tip of its existence, you essentially have a performance spec document, a contract document, and a hope. It's completely undefined. You might have some loose idea of how many beds they want, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
performance
Mm-hmm.
spec, and a location. They're going to say, like, we want to put it on this land here, go. So you have to put together pricing, risk analysis, all of this sort of stuff on extremely minimal information.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you've done hospitals before, you have a massive leg up on understanding what risks can happen. But then as the project progresses, how do you track that you are staying within that risk regime and things haven't changed?
Yeah.
Because now you're into a Revit 3D model that may not match the initial vision at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
If you overstep a performance spec, well, that gets a little easier to argue. You go from a 500 bed unit to a 600 bed unit. Okay, well, now we've changed the performance spec, but that almost never happens. It's much more subtle than that. They go from, hey, the initial model that was bid had, standard gauge, standard ductwork throughout this area. And the
Mm-hmm.
owner came back and actually said, we'd like to see that in stainless steel. Well, in a 3D model, that's an incredibly trivial change to make. You flop material types. But
Mm-hmm.
in reality, the impact of that is fundamentally going to damage the financial viability of the project because stainless steel is vastly more expensive
Yeah.
than standard ductwork. And so, or they, come in and say, hey, your model shows all aluminum conductors in here. We'd actually like to go to copper now. And if that isn't captured as a like, okay, no, this is a P3 project. The aluminum meets all the performance specs. If you want to go to copper, that is a cost increase that you will have to pay for it
Mm-hmm.
now. But it's really easy because usually that ends up at some VDC CAD person's desk, and they simply go and change that in the Revit model because it makes sense. And by the time it's discovered that the project's gone off the rails and this is where it started, it's far too late to do anything. So getting all of these diverse streams into something, I mean, Procore is working at this. They are a fairly comprehensive data warehouse right now
Okay.
for construction. They will take in your 3D models. They will take in all of this stuff. They do have a fairly robust API that you can tap into to start to monitor these things. But it's still, it isn't where we need to get to, where you can actually say, okay, my project as a whole is going off the rails 6 months before I know it's going off the rails. And that is the 6 to 12 inches ahead of the cutting edge that we're looking to get to right now. It's very possible. It's just incredibly hard. The beauty of this is there's an infinity between really, really hard and actually impossible. So you just have to do the really, really hard things.
Yeah. Another risk-prone area I wanted to look at in terms of that contractor lifestyle as well is, the handoff from estimating to project management. You know, I'm sure
Yeah.
you're familiar with this step. Assumptions may get lost. Qualifications might not make it into the project file, and the field can, sometimes end up executing a scope that doesn't quite match what was priced, as we may or may not have just been talking about. But how would you say that AI tools and better data hygiene can help close that gap? And where do these tools slot into a well-structured estimate to execution handoff?
Yeah, this has been a personal question
Sorry for
for
striking a
me.
nerve.
Oh, 100% yes. I have seen numerous schools of thought on this process as a whole. Having worked in several different companies at different stages of the project, from GC to mechanical and electrical, and it's fascinating to see how much corporate culture actually plays into this. It's not
Interesting.
even a technical, it doesn't, the technical feeds into it tremendously, but it actually starts more at a corporate culture
Okay.
side of the project life cycle. And there's essentially almost two very opposing cultures that develop around this.
Okay.
And I haven't really seen, I've done a bunch of JVs with different companies and seen into the inner workings of a fairly, reasonable number of actual companies in this process. And I haven't really found any that really adhere to a middle ground. So essentially, you have two camps here. One is the estimator is to turn over a complete and comprehensive, all bells and whistles, 6 binders of data to the PM that detail out from what type of coffee and cream he had in the morning to, when he left at night to close his job, every aspect of the train of thought. And I mean, it is hyper audited throughout that process. And then you have the other school of thought is, no, we pay the PMs a lot of money to do their job really, really well. So the estimator is literally only to send one email to the PM, and it is to have their budget for the project, and then it's hands off. And then it's on the PM to go and, do everything. And I've seen that latter one to the point where one company that I was working with at one point, that I didn't work for them, they were a partner in a project. They kept their estimators in a completely separate building.
Interesting.
From the execution side. And I'm like, okay, guys. I'm like, there are extremes, and then there are extremes. And I'm like, all extremes are generally bad. So most companies are, not quite to those extremes, but they're usually pretty far on either side of
Yeah.
that needle, and it's really kind of bizarre to see. So depending on which side of that you're on, the AI can do nothing for you, or it can do something for you. Like
Okay.
it's really a tool of communication. So if you're not communicating, it
Hmm.
can't do anything for you. So if you haven't, can't tell here, I'm not a huge fan of the run the estimating group in complete isolation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because the flip side of that is they also can never get feedback in that scenario,
Of course.
on how things are going. And you can't, like, my whole goal is always to close the loop.
Hmm.
Now, on the other side of that fence, handing everything over and having project execution drive the estimate, I have seen that fail pretty severely also. It came down to human psychology. And this
Okay.
is where AI can really kick in, because it largely removes that element of human psychology. It is a mathematical construct. So AIs do not feel. They can elicit a feeling in us when
Hmm.
we are talking to them, but that is a statistical
Yeah.
thing. But they themselves do not actually feel, they do not actually have any incentives outside of their training data set. And so what happens is when you bring PMs into the estimating process, there is a fundamental part of human psychology where we remember bad things far more vividly than we remember good things. Most of us can pull to memory instantaneously that presentation we did in high school where we were deeply embarrassed by how we performed.
Hmm.
And yet we couldn't remember more than one or two people that were in our classes for it.
Yeah.
So it's a really bizarre one. So what happens is PMs are very, and it's not a slight against project managers in any way. It's just the reality of the psychology. They are far more likely to remember all the things that were missed on projects, all the things that cost money on projects. And I have almost never seen a PM show up with here's where things were double counted.
Hmm.
Here's where we made money at this. And the thing to keep in mind, if you account for everything that was always missed for all time, you will never ever win a job, because there is a counterpoint to that not all projects, in fact, relatively few projects actually lose money.
Hmm.
Those projects that do can cost you the company, mind you. But if you count for everything that was always missed on all the projects,
Hmm.
you will never win a bid, because the reality is on all of those projects, probably actually none of them lost money. Very few of them, like a small percentage of them, might have lost some amount of money.
Hmm.
But the reality is those things that were missed were offset somewhere along the line. And you have to account for both the wins and the losses when you look at it during
Yeah.
closeout. But by having a human doing that, you end up with this psychological artifact that
Interesting.
evolution has taught us to remember the bad things and not the good things.
Yeah.
And so it makes it borderline impossible to actually properly judge in those situations how much of a risk factor you should put on. And that's where AI reviewing all of your projects that, the PMs have run, that sort of thing. And AI is completely impartial. It is not, it has never had to survive as a hunter gatherer. It
Hmm.
has never had to, so it hasn't had any sort of natural input like we as a species have. So it can literally walk in and say, this was missed, this was doubled, this made money, this lost money, and it is mathematically abstracted from emotion.
Yeah.
And then you can actually say, okay, now we can come up with a proper risk allowance on this project without understanding. But it does take access to all the data to achieve that. And that's the part that's really hard, because a lot of those wins and losses are deeply buried in financial packages, in billing reports, and those sort of things. And that's really, if you're going to expose that to an AI, you really, really want to pay attention to the sovereign AI clauses.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we've gone so many different places in this conversation, obviously, because risk mitigation is a huge topic, but it really does sound like when it comes to this subject and AI's role in it, it's kind of an arms race in terms of who can learn how to efficiently unlock all of that data, both as quickly and as safely as possible. Am I wrong to say that?
You are hitting the nail on the head right now. Yes. What happens to that data once it's unlocked? Like, what is going to change in construction in the next 3 to 5 years as construction moves very, very slowly? But you could say, okay, what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? As a lot of the methodologies that were commodities to the owners, to the general contractors, are now available to the sub trades, and moving into that aspect. And even the general contractors will be able to start to leverage their AI, or their information through AI, in a way that has never been possible before. And it is an incredibly powerful time for that, because part of the core challenge we're facing construction as a whole right now is the essentially the brain drain, the retirement process. And there are whole companies that have sunk historically because key personnel retired.
Yeah.
And they took that corporate memory with them. Well, one of the cool things with AI right now is it can become part of that corporate memory.
Yeah.
And, it can start to understand that corporate structure. So when a key person leaves, the AI can still back the next person up and say, hey, this is historically what's happened here. And it's that level of adaptability to them that gives them a huge leg up, and the fact that they can extend our human memory. Like, the way that human memory actually operates is uniquely similar to how a lot of these LLMs operate. And that's really cool to see how it enables us to start to do things that we've never had the capacity before. Most humans on average in, the North America here, we live to be 70 to 80 years old, and we're extending that. That's an incredibly short time frame when you consider that some of the oldest companies in North America are hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
Like, how do you maintain that corporate memory in the fundamental reality of the humans that are driving your corporation? And there's been a lot of talk of replacing all the humans in a corporation. I don't see that happening. I think that there's going to be a technical change in this, in the way that corporations are structured, in the way that they look. But I think that it is going to be overall a significant empowerment moving forward. And understanding risk in our jobs day to day is such a huge part where this can step in. Because if you're really, really good as a human at risk analysis, you're probably not as great at actually estimating a job, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so these tools can help backstop our weaknesses.
Yeah. I love talking to you because I feel like I always come away kind of amazed at how interesting of a time we're in right now when it comes to the opportunities that technology is bringing to electrical contracting. And I do believe, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But before we go, Melvin, if anyone wants to continue this conversation with you, how can they get in touch with you or Patabid if they want to know more?
Info@patabid.com is a solid way to reach out to us. You can find all of our contact information on our website, patabid.com. And you can even fill out a direct form in there to reach out to us to see kind of how our systems address these questions, and what we're working on these days to automate all of this.
Amazing. Well, Thank you again, Melvin, and huge thank you to all of our listeners out there for tuning in to episode 2 of our Site Current miniseries. Subscribe to our direct and current podcast feed for more explorations into how technology is evolving electrical contracting practices, along with more Melvin in our third and final episode of Site Current. I'm Jack Burton, signing off.